This will be a recording of the Neville Goddard presentation that is a book by him, and I will simply work with the book, go through the book that is entitled At Your Command, and do the book that is a very, very powerful book, as are all of Neville's books. I had thought to do the book, The Law and the Promise, which I may come back to do as well, The Law and the Promise, and do that because it is a very, very powerful book, The Law and the Promise. We understand the word law, understand the word promise, and when we put them together, they are something that we find to be dependable. Perhaps I'll go ahead and do the law and the promise. Do the law and the promise. Law and the promise. Neville begins this book with a text out of the Bible. It says, "And now go, write it before them on a tablet, and inscribe it in a book, that it may be for the time to come as a witness." The idea, of course, is to write it down before it happened. That reveals that it's your conviction that it will occur. Write it down before it happens. Reveals your conviction that it will occur. So you're really putting yourself out there when you do that. And in this case, what we're saying is write down what it is that you want for your own individual life. Write down for your own individual life what you want to be your 4D life. Write that down. Write down what you want to be as far as it concerns your 4D life. Isaiah, the 30th chapter, verse 8, for those that need a biblical reference, write that down. What do you want? And to assist individuals in doing this, we have what we call a strategic spiritual planner. A strategic spiritual planner. And we provide that to you for free, no cost to you. And we invite you to send us an email at info@iwillrestore.com, info@iwillrestore.com, and per your sending us that email and requesting the Spiritual Strategic Life Planner in the subject line, then we will send to you this particular item. info@iwillrestore.com. We will send you the Spiritual Strategic Life Planner, and then you write it down as far as your life, what you want it to be. Remember, it says here to write it down. And now go write it before them on a tablet and inscribe it in a book, that it may be for the time to come as a witness forever. Write it down. And so if you want to, again, with this type of thing, make it public to a more public group of people. What we recommend in regard to that, and if you're bold enough to make it to public, to a larger group of individuals, but the recommendation, especially in this day and time, and it depends on your level of faith, but you could also make it public to as large a body as you would like. And then, but what we recommend is that you make it available to a group of individuals who are supportive of your vision. Write it down. And as you grow in your confidence and conviction that what you are writing is indeed the Word of God, those things that come to you from Spirit, the visions that come to you from Spirit, the dreams that come to you from Spirit, then perhaps you can make that. And the reason why you want to be in a supportive community is because the aspect that there is a lot of criticism, of course, in 2019 that goes with anything that you might say in the public square. As always, there has been the criticism. The aspect of being out front like that is nothing new. The moment you read the Bible or any other real spiritual account, then you find this to be so. That is why in times past individuals were in the caves, in the catacombs, and this type of thing. It may be something glorified today to say that I'm a Christian, but much of that is because the idea of being a Christian does not carry the level of persecution that occurred previously. And that has nothing to do with the aspect that it is something that has changed as far as Christianity. It has not changed, really. The idea of being a Christian and the ability to look at what is happening in the public and even in regard to government, the stance toward the poor and the widow and all of these things, that's in the Bible. That's in the Bible. And so to take a stand in regard to that in 2019 in the United States of America, the stand toward the immigrant and the stranger, all of these things right in the Bible. And so to take a stand in regard to that, again, you're in the public square. And so you write those things down. But this particular presentation that we're looking at here, where it says the law and the promise, we're looking at that from the standpoint of writing it down concerning your own personal, private life. Write it down according to the text so it can be a witness. And so we're looking at a book by Neville, chapter 1 of the book, The Law and the Promise. And his premise in chapter 1 is that imagining creates reality. Imagining creates reality. And that is the title that he's given. The law, imagining creates reality. Man is all imagination. God is man and exists in us and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination. That is God himself. And he's quoting a poet named Blake, or a writer named Blake, William Blake to be exact, an English poet, English writer. And Blake was a genius, a mystic, and you might want to look Blake up anytime that you have someone like a Neville Goddard and they're mentioning an individual within their writings. It is a good thing to look those individuals up. So this is Neville Goddard. My name is Dr. Dennis L. Waters, a senior, because there are a number of Dennis L. Waters in my lineage that I need to designate myself and identify myself, differentiate myself by saying senior. And so this is Dr. Dennis L. Waters, senior. And this particular item I'm reading from the book, The Law and the Promise, by Neville Goddard. So that's where we start. But Neville here mentions Blake, William Blake. And so man is all imagination. God is man and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, that is, God himself. The purpose of the first portion of this book is to show, through actual true stories, how imagining creates reality. Science progresses by way of hypotheses, tentatively tested and afterwards accepted or rejected according to the fact of experience. The claim that imagining creates reality needs no more consideration than is allowed by science. It proves itself in performance. And so here Neville is saying that in the same way that you test a scientific hypothesis, he's saying test this. Test this. And really, that's a biblical idea as well. The text says, "Prove me now herewith, said the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it." And so the idea is that Spirit says to the human, put me to the test. Put me to the test. In other words, do enough that it becomes no longer a matter of faith, but a matter of conviction. And that's what Neville is speaking about here, is a step-by-step progression, building of faith. Step-by-step progression, building of faith. And so, write it down first. You sense, you're praying, you're going through a process. Write it down first so that you have a record of it. And then, per writing that down, then go through a process by which you continue to live, build your faith and everything, but be aware of that which you've written down. Because so many times when an individual just simply goes through a process and they say they want something, 5 seconds later, 5 minutes later, they have forgotten that and have something else that they want. It can be as fast as the television commercial or the radio commercial occurs. And so what Neville is saying is that here's some proof that what I'm speaking about, and his premise is, imagination creates reality. The first step that he says is write it down, that which you desire. Write it down. And he's proposing that in a scientific test, there's what is called the cause and effect. The cause and effect. In scientific parlance, is called the independent variable and the dependent variable. There's cause, independent variable, and then the dependent variable is the effect. And the cause here, he's saying imagining is the independent variable. Imagining. I continue with chapter 1. The world in which we live is a world of imagination. In fact, life itself is an activity of imagining. For Blake, wrote Professor Morrison of the University of St. Andrews, the world originates in a divine activity identical with what we know ourselves as the activity of imagination. His task being to open the immortal eyes of man inward into the worlds of thought, into eternity, ever expanding in the bosom of God, the human imagination. I continue. Nothing appears or continues in being by a power of its own. Events happen because comparatively stable imaginal activities create them, and they continue in being only as long as they receive such support. The secret of imagining, writes Douglas Fawcett, is the greatest of all problems to the solution of which the mystics aspire. Supreme power, supreme wisdom, Supreme delight lie in the far-off solution of this mystery. That's a quote. The quote begins, "The secret of imagining is the greatest of all problems, to the solution of which the mystics aspire. Supreme power, supreme wisdom, supreme delight lie in the far-off solution of this mystery." Again, a powerful statement, but I continue. "When man solves the mystery of imagining, he will have discovered the secret of causation, and that is, imagining creates reality. Therefore, the man or woman who is aware of what he or she is imagining knows what he or she is creating, realizes more and more that the drama of life is imaginal, not physical. All activity is, at bottom, imaginal. An awakened imagination works with a purpose. It creates and conserves the desirable and transforms or destroys the undesirable." Now, again, I pause. That's a very powerful, powerful statement. Because initially, when you may bring something to pass, it may be different from what you desire. But you want to conserve the desirable. What I call eat the meat, throw the bones away. Eat the meat, throw the bones away. Keep the good, then get rid of that which is undesired, again using your imagination. Using your imagination. So conserve the desirable and transforms or destroys the undesirable. The older people who were older than me, would say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to keep the baby. They used to bathe us in what we call foot tubs. And after you finish with the foot tub, this is before we had showers, after you finish with the bathing, and the water, the dirty water, was in the foot tub, well, you don't want to throw the baby out while you're throwing out the dirty water. Keep the good, the desirable, and then get rid of the undesirable. Divine imagining and human imagining, I continue with the reading, are not two powers at all, rather one. The valid distinction which exists between the seeming two lie not in the substance with which they operate, but in the degree of intensity of the operant power itself. Acting at high tension, an imaginal act is an immediate objective fact. Keyed low, an imaginal act is realized in a time process. But whether imagination is keyed high or low, it is the ultimate, essentially non-objective reality from which objects are poured forth into sudden fancies. No object is independent of imagining on some level or levels. Everything in the world owes its character to imagination on one of its various levels. Now, that's all inclusive. If you can imagine that. Everything in the world owes its character to imagination on one of its various levels. I continue reading. In quotation marks, here's another quotation, or quote. Objective reality, writes Fitz, spelled Fichte. Let me read the entire thing. Objective reality is solely produced through imagination. That is Fitz. Objects seem so independent of our perception of them that we incline to forget that they owe their origin to imagination. The world in which we live is a world of imagination, and man, through his imaginal activity, creates the realities and the circumstances of life. This he does either knowingly or unknowingly. Men pay too little attention to this precious gift. The human imagination, particularly non-existent, unless there is a conscious possession of it and a readiness to use it. All men possess the power to create reality, but this power sleeps as though dead when not consciously created or exercised. So the power is present, but asleep unless we consciously exercise it. Men live in the very heart of creation, the human imagination, yet are no wiser for what takes place therein. The future will not be fundamentally different from the imaginal activity of man or women. Therefore, the individual who can summon at will whatever imaginal activity he pleases or she pleases, and to whom the visions of his or her imagination are as real as the forms of nature, is master of his or her fate. Again, very powerful statements. Powerful. Let this sink in. The future is the imaginal activity of humans in its creative march. Imagining is the creative power not only of the poet, the artist, the actor, and orator, but of the scientist, the inventor, the merchant, and the artisan. Its abuse in unrestrained, unlovely image making is obvious, but its abuse is undue repression breeds a sterility which robs man of actual wealth of experience. Imagining novel solutions to ever more complex problems is far more noble than to run from problems. So, again, let me read this again. The future is the imaginal activity of humans in its creative march. Imagining is the creative power not only of the poet, the artist, the actor, and orator, but of the scientist, the inventor, the merchant, and the artisan. Its abuse in unrestricted, unlovely image making is obvious, but its abuse in undue repression breeds a sterility which robs humanity of actual wealth of experience. Again, this is powerful. There's an abuse when it's used, imagination is used, and it's unrestrained. It's unrestrained. And you have the unlovely, the unwanted, just stuff that is just bizarre. And people get caught up in just watching and paying attention to all of that. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, and you might be caught up in this kind of thing and understand what is taking place. Getting caught up in constantly paying attention to the undesirable. This is maybe hard for many people to actually understand, but the choice of what you see in the media, on television, listen to on the radio, on podcasts, all of these are type of imaginal activity. And there are some things that you may look at and listen to that are creating for you something that you wouldn't want to be in the world, and some things that you're paying attention to as a young person that you wouldn't want to be in the world as an adult. But the premise is that imagination creates reality. And so you have a lot of individuals who are looking at, thinking about the same thing, and as a result of that, you have this entire process going on over the course of many years. Whether they want to or not, whether they're conscious of it or not, they are creating their future. The statement, its abuse in unrestrained, unlovely image making is obvious. So individuals who are, when they are not consciously able to understand the images that they're bringing before their minds, and I would say when they are seeing things, experiencing things that they have not previously written down, then those things have been in some way programmed in them previously by someone else. Unrestrained, unlovely image making is obvious, but it's abuse in undue repression. So here he's saying that on the one hand, using it flippantly, if you will, is one level of abuse, but there's also the abuse that occurs when you don't use imagination. You repress it. It becomes sterile, which means it has no potency. And it robs people of a wealth of experience. And it robs people of wealth. What is that wealth? He says, imagining novel solutions to ever more complex problems is far more noble than to run from problems. The word is that Einstein dreamed of riding a light wave. And it's then that he came up with the theory of relativity, E equals mc squared. He said energy is created by mass times the square of light, times the speed of the square of light. And what he ultimately said there was that everything is relative, which is what Neville was saying, and is relative to this imaginal activity. Let me go on. This is powerful. Life is a continual solution of a continuously synthetic problem. Imagining creates events. The world, created out of man's imagining, comprises unnumbered warring beliefs. Therefore, there can never be a perfectly stable or static state. Today's events are bound to disturb yesterday's established order. Imaginative men and women invariably unsettle a pre-existing peace of mind. Do not bow before the dictates of facts and accept life on the basis of the world without. Assert the supremacy of your imaginal acts over facts and put all things in subjection to them. Hold fast to your ideals in your imagination. Nothing can take it from you but your failure to persist in imagining the ideal realized. Imagine only such states that are of value or promise well. To attempt to change circumstances before you change your imaginal activity is to struggle against life in such a way that you struggle against the very nature of things. There can be no outward change until there's first an imaginal change. Everything you do, unaccompanied by an imaginal change, is but futile, a readjustment of surfaces. Imagining the wish fulfilled brings about a union with that state. And during that union, you behave in keeping with your imaginal change. This shows you that an imaginal change will result in a change of behavior. However, your ordinary imaginal alterations as you pass from one state to another are not transformations because each of them is so rapidly succeeded by another in the reverse direction. But whenever one state grows so stable as to become your constant mood, your habitual attitude, then that habitual state defines your character and is a true transformation. True transformation. How do you do it? How do you bring about a true transformation? Self-abandonment. Self-abandonment. This is the secret. You must abandon yourself mentally to your wish fulfilled, in your love for that state, the state of your wish fulfilled. And in so doing, live in the new state and no more in the old state. You can't commit yourself to what you do not love. So the secret of self-commission is faithful plus love. Is faith plus love. Faith is believing what is unbelievable. Commit yourself to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. In faith that this act of self-commission will become a reality. And it must become a reality because imagining creates reality. Imagination is both conservative and transformative. It is conservative when it builds its world from images supplied by memory and the evidence of the senses. It is creatively transformative when its images are things as they ought to be, building its world out of the generous dreams of fancy. In the procession of images, the ones that take precedence naturally are those of the senses. Nevertheless, a present sense impression is only an image. It does not differ in nature from a memory image or the image of a wish. What makes a present sense impression so objectively real is the individual's imagination function in it and thinking from it. Whereas a memory image of a wish, the individual's imagination is not functioning in it and thinking from it, but is functioning out of it and thinking of it. If you would enter into the image of your imagination, then would you know what it is to be creatively transformative. Then would you realize your wish, and then you would be happy. Every image can be embodied, but unless you yourself enter the image and think from it, it is incapable of birth. Therefore, it is the height of folly to expect the wish to be realized by the mere passage of time. That which requires imaginative occupancy to produce its effect obviously cannot be effected without such occupancy. You cannot be in one image and not suffer the consequences of not being in another. Imagination is spiritual sensation. Enter the image of the wish fulfilled. Then, give it sensory vividness and tones of reality by mentally acting as you would act were it a physical fact. Now this is what I mean by spiritual sensation. Imagine that you are holding the rose in your hand. Smell it. Do you detect the odor of roses? Well, if the rose is not there, why is its fragrance in the air? Through spiritual sensation. That is, through the imaginal sight, sound, scent, taste, and touch. You can give to the image sensory vividness. If you do this, all things will conspire to aid your harvesting, and upon reflection you will see how subtle were the threads that led to your goal. You could never have devised the means which your imaginal activity employed to fulfill itself. If you long to escape from your present sense fixation, to transform your present life into a dream of what might be, you need but imagine that you are already what you want to be and to feel the way you would expect to feel under such circumstances. Like the make-believe of a child who is remaking the world after its own heart, create your world out of pure dreams of fancy. Mentally enter into your dream. Mentally do what you would do, actually, were it physically true. You will discover that dreams are realized not by the rich, but by the imaginative. Nothing stands between you and the fulfillment of your dreams but facts. And facts are the creations of imagining. If you change your imagining, you will change the facts. Man and his past are one continuous structure. This structure contains all of the facts which have been conserved and still operate below the threshold of his surface mind. For him, it is merely history. For him, it seems unalterable, a dead and firmly fixed past, but for itself, it is living. It is part of the living age. He cannot leave behind him the mistakes of the past, for nothing disappears. Everything that has been is still in existence. The past still exists, and it gives and still gives its results. Man must go back in memory, seek for and destroy the causes of evil, however far back they lie. This going into the past and replaying a scene of the past in imagination as it ought to have been played the first time, I call revision. And revision results in repeal. Changing your life means changing the past. The causes of any present evil are the unrevised scenes of the past. The past and the present form the whole structure of man. They are carrying all of its contents with it. Any alteration of content will result in an alteration in the present and future. Live nobly so that mind can store a past well worthy of recall. Should you fail to do so, remember the first act of creation, correction, or cure is always revised. If the past is recreated into the present, so will the revised past be recreated into the present, or else to claim, though your sin be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow, is a lie, and it is no lie. The purpose of the story commentary that follows is to link up as briefly as possible the distinct but never disconnected themes of the 14 chapters into which I have divided the first part of this book. It will serve, I hope, as a thread of coherent thought that binds the whole into proof of its claim. Imagining creates reality. To make such a claim is easily done. To prove it in the experience of others is far sterner. To stir you to use the law constructively in your own life, that is the aim of this book. Imagining creates reality. The idea is to stir you to use this law. 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 That's the desire. To stir you to use this law. This item, the law and the promise, again, would like to send to you. You can read it. That's my rendition of it, reading it. But send to you so that you can read it over and over again, or you play this download over and over again. The implications of it, the possibilities of it are wide. It said everything exists and continues to exist by virtue of imagination. That's powerful. I'll do another chapter a little later. Imagining creates reality. Imagine what we could do as an individual, or what we could do working together. Blessings.